Hi, everyone. This is Dennis Orthman from SMI. Phil and Stuart, can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And welcome to today's SMITU webinar entitled The Supply Chain Optimization, a Transformational Pathway. My name is Dennis Orthman, and I'm a Senior Director with SMI, and I'm pleased to be a host and a participant for today's webinar session. Today, we have over 50 connections that are participating in this session, and SMI is thankful to you all that you could find the time to be a part of today's webinar. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees for today's session are in listen-only mode in order to eliminate any background noises and to ensure audio clarity. The voices that you'll hear today are my own voice and the voices of our presenters, Phil Pettigrew and Stuart Leahy. Although our attendees are in listen-only mode, we are interested in your questions. The webinar technology does allow for attendees to submit questions using the questions feature in the control panel on your screen. All attendees are encouraged to submit questions at any time during today's session. When we finished our presentation, I'll then read the submitted questions, and we'll all do our best to try and answer them. Today's session will be approximately 1 hour in total length, depending upon the number of questions that we cover. Lastly, I'd like you to know that all attendees will receive an email as a follow-up to today's webinar. That'll be a survey request from SMI. I want to encourage you to complete the survey, as the feedback we receive is an important component that helps SMIs to continue and improve our webinar program. Now I'm pleased to introduce you to our presenters. We have with us today Mr. Phil Pettigrew. Phil is the Director of Materials Management at Denver Health and Hospital Authority. Phil's a recognized industry veteran and previously worked at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. Phil's background is in industrial engineering, and he's led SMI initiative teams that have worked on the perfect department methodology and on the supply chain optimization pathway. Phil is joined by Stuart Leahy. Stuart is the Manager of Special Projects at Denver Health and Hospital Authority. Stuart also has an industrial engineering background and has brought with him many supply chain and data management ideas and concepts from other non-healthcare industries where he has worked. Stuart, along with Phil, led both the SMI initiative team on Perfect Department and on the initiative team on supply chain optimization. Phil and Stuart, thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Great. I'm going to begin with just some introductory information, and then I'm going to turn the session over to Phil and Stuart, who will use a few slides, but then they're going to switch platforms and to show you the actual supply chain optimization tool and provide a demonstration and some background information. Our goal today is to provide everyone with enough information about the new supply chain optimization tool that you're going to want to immediately go to the SMI website and download it and begin to use it in your own supply chain. So again, thank you everyone for being with us. Today's session, I'm going to do this introductions and background information, and Stuart's going to cover, what is supply chain optimization, talk about how to prepare for a supply chain optimization project, and talk specifically about the plan pillar, one of the components within the supply chain optimization tool. We're then going to switch to that live demonstration, and Stuart's going to take us through a section here, show us the process and the tools, maintaining integrity, the various factors that might come into play on that particular pillar, talk about the metrics, which are the heart and core of supply chain optimization, and then show you about a case study. We'll talk some at the end about adoption and marketing, and then we'll take some questions. So that's the outline for today's session. Stuart, if you could move to the next slide. Great. Supply chain optimization is a new SMI resource. We are currently in the middle of a 3-month release period where we're supplying this product to SMI members only. It's an interactive document, and you'll see that in the demonstration. And our plans are to release this to the industry as a whole on February 1st of 2015. And we're going to package this along with 2 other related SMI resources. the perfect order, and the perfect department index. Those three tools, perfect order, perfect department index, and supply chain optimization, will be repackaged as what we call the transactional efficiency package, as they're all very much related to improving transactional efficiencies. Next slide, Stuart. Great. For those of you that are SMI members, you can access this tool right now through the SMI website. You must go into the Your SMI section, which is password protected, and you'll come to the Your SMI section. And if you scroll down under the Supply Chain Optimization Initiative, you'll see where this arrow is reflected in the Other section. You click on that, and you'll be able to download the actual tool itself. It's not an online tool. It's one that you need to download and to put on your hard drive. So we want to encourage those folks on the call here and on the webinar that are SMI members to download that tool at the end of today's webinar. Next slide, Stuart. Before we get started and turn it over to Phil to talk a little bit more about what is supply chain optimization, we think it's important that we express and acknowledge those people who have contributed so much to the creation of this particular tool. We had a very large initiative team with many people involved over the course of at least 12 months. Those folks that played particularly heavy lifting roles here, obviously our presenters at Denver Health, our friends at Cook Medical, Owens & Minor, Advocate Healthcare, Geisinger, FMOL, Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady, BD, and ROI. Those folks did a great job. This tool would not have been created without their contributions. We want to extend our thanks out to them. So thank you. Stuart, we can go to the next slide. And now I'm going to turn it over to Phil. And Phil, you can take us through from here.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Good morning to everybody. I hope you're having a good holiday season. So I want to take you through this progression of the building blocks that we had on supply chain optimization. It's actually started with SMI's initiative on the perfect order. And the perfect order was actually in definition when that team did its work, and that was one of the defining pieces of SMI as far as one of the projects that was early on. It was a purchase order that was processed electronically, really from the order to the payment process without human intervention. It was delivered to the correct location, on time, undamaged, at the right price, with the desired quantity on the first attempt. That was the definition of the perfect order. And the key element there was that it was done without human intervention. ROI, working with BD, actually utilized this project to great length and actually worked through the process as far as working out some of the bugs of the perfect order. And there was a white paper that was generated as a result of the perfect order. Perfect order dealt with 10 different indicators that were really yes-no questions. And so as one went through an order that was processed to a supplier, you would answer yes, no to any one of those 10 indicators. All 10 indicators had to be answered yes to be a perfect order. So that was what the perfect order concept was all about. We took that initiative of the perfect order and actually looked at it in depth here at Denver Health to see how what we could do with that entity. What we found was that it's somewhat punitive in nature, because if you score any no's on the 10 indicators, then it did not constitute a perfect order. It also led you to the fact that you could actually be ordering the wrong product, and it could go through the order process perfectly, yet you get the wrong product at the requesting department. So as we looked at that process, we said the process really begins with the requesting department and not with the purchase order. So as we looked at internally within our own departments at Denver Health, we found that as a provider organization, we do business more in a department level than we do as far as our financials go, versus looking at specific orders to companies. So the perfect order had some limitations and didn't tell us everything that we needed to do as far as our internal supply chain at Denver Health. So we developed a concept, took the concepts from the perfect order and created the perfect department index, where we actually looked at the internal efficiency and effectiveness of the operations ourselves and developed 9 indicators that are scored on a scoring of 0 to 100, and with that then produced a PDI, or a perfect department index, by department. The roll-up of that for all departments within the hospital produced a perfect hospital index. That's how the perfect order evolved into the perfect department index. But even with the perfect department index, we realized that we were so focused internally within the 4 walls of the hospital that it really didn't go far enough. And at that point in time is when we actually brought a team together of SMI experts, manufacturers, distributors, and provider organizations to say, we really want to look at the supply chain from the manufacturing piece to the bedside. So that's where the supply chain optimization concept really was hatched. And from that perspective, we started with literally a whiteboard and said, what's important at the manufacturing level, distributor level, and provider level, and let's take those concepts and let's make the supply chain as perfect as we can from start to finish. And we called this the supply chain optimization piece. It was in that 2-day retreat, really, where all the ideas and concepts of the supply chain optimization was really the genesis. And that really formed the core group of the supply chain, of the SMI group that then took supply chain optimization to its current product. So the team's problem statement started this way. In today's environment, really there's a number of inefficiencies and poor communications that exist in our supply chain that causes some disruptions and some waste to really be crept into the supply chain itself. In addition to that, optimizing one part of the supply chain could have a negative impact on the rest of the supply chain or unintended consequences. So previously, there were no common set of actionable metrics that we could use in the supply chain itself to measure the efficiency and effectiveness of the supply chain from the point of origin, the manufacturer, to the point of use, which is at the bedside. So there was no acceptable measure that we could find that would tell the organization where they were at on that continuum for optimizing the supply chain. Really what the supply chain should provide is an effective integration from the manufacturer through the distributor to the hospital and the bedside where the patient resides. However, that lack of integration between the partners on the supply chain can introduce waste and efficiency into the system. So it was with that context that the supply chain optimization piece that we moved to the next level. So what is the supply chain optimization and why should you use this tool? Supply chain optimization is more of a prescriptive process as far as a process improvement mechanism. It's designed to be used between 2 trading partners, both the buyer and the seller piece. It's to look at transactional efficiency of the operation and to use those metrics and best practices to really generate efficiencies that can then be measured through the metrics over time. So why use supply chain optimization? It's going to result in lower cost from both the supplier perspective and also the provider perspective, and it goes beyond the transactional relationship and gets into transparency and trust that exists between the business partners themselves. So really, this was an evolutionary process that we went from perfect order to perfect department index internally within the hospital to supply chain optimization to include the suppliers into this whole improvement process from the manufacturer to the bedside. As we put the concepts together from the team that met in the retreat, and we started to organize all of those ideas and what was important to each part of the supply chain, we found that the ideas and concepts and business practices could be sorted into 6 pillars. And those are the 6 business processes that make up supply chain optimization. The idea is to then optimize each of those pillars using metrics and using the best practices and the how-to processes to really improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the supply chain, where benefits and supply cost reduction will result from both the manufacturer, distributor, and the hospital's perspective. So the 6 pillars themselves, and we'll go into more detail into this piece, are plan, price, purchase, fill, receive, and pay. So I'm going to hand this over to Stuart now, who's going to go into the tool itself and show you what the supply chain optimization tool and how to navigate through it.
So good morning, everyone. So here is the tool, and what I'm going to do just is kind of take 30 seconds just to show you how to navigate through the tool. The tool itself is a PDF document, and there are hyperlinks within the tool to move between sections. So if you come to the second page, which is the table of contents, within this, each of these elements are hyperlinks. So if you would like to go directly to look at recommended project initiatives, all you would need to do is click on here, and it will load to the correct page. At the top right, you can move between sections or move back to the table of contents. And there is the ability to print all 77 pages of the document. It's not our intention that you would print the document, take it home, and read it at night. If I go back to the table of contents, each of the pillars is also linked. So if you would like to go directly to purchasing, you can just click here, and you would be able to see the full gamut of the content for purchasing. Again, within purchasing, if you want to go straight to the tools and the process, you could click on that, and it would load the page. So I will go back now to the table of contents, and Phil will go through some essentials of supply chain optimization.
So once you get past the table of contents page, you come to this welcome page to supply chain optimization. And really the key part of this is the last paragraph, where it talks about what is supply chain optimization and why use it, which I covered before. Moving to the next page, then this is an overview piece of it, again, which I've already gone through and talked through as far as looking at metrics and best practices, and then the actual how the tool was actually used through some testing that was done by the various team members to verify and justify that indeed we were on the right track as far as the overall process goes. So that's what the overview piece of it and how the tool is organized. This takes you to the next page where you look at the 6 different pillars. And the first pillar is the plan pillar. And the plan pillar is the only one of the 6 pillars that is really non-reoccurring. And I'm going to get into more detail into that in a second. The other 5 pillars are reoccurring pillars, and price basically deals with the whole fact of having the accurate price of the item and ensuring that it remains accurate over time. So again, having the correct price between the provider organization ordering the product and the supplier organization and the trading partner that's going to provide the product. Purchase deals with the EDI aspect. So it goes back to the perfect order concept. How much of the purchase orders are actually being transmitted between trading partners via EDI. Fill deals with the filling the order from the supplier's perspective. So again, what is the fill rate of the supplier, the back orders, and the number of returns that the supplier incurs. So that pillar deals with actually filling the order at the supplier level. The next pillar is receive. Receiving is, again, accuracy of the delivery time, when you want it, the quantity of what you want is shipped and received in the correct location, and how efficient was the operation, again, using electronic transmissions for as many of the transactions as possible. The last pillar is the pay process, And with the pay process, we're measuring and looking at the whole invoicing process and payment process again, ensuring and trying to make it as electronic as possible so that, again, we have no touches. The next page deals with the critical success factors. And an individual or an organization won't want to get into supply chain optimization unless they can answer affirmative to these various aspects. The first part of it is that the supply chain optimization is not a quick fix. It's not implement this software package and you're going to be where you need to be. It truly takes time and an investment of resources of both trading partners to work diligently through the process over time to really see not only the improvement, but also to sustain those results over time. You're going to only be looking at key trading partners. You're not going to look at the 6,000 companies that a hospital might do business with. You're going to be looking at those key strategic trading partners because, again, it takes an investment of time to truly make supply chain optimization work for your organization. So I would suggest that from 5 to 6, initially, you would probably start with a company, and then that would expand to maybe your top 5 or 6 companies that you're doing business with, whether that be distributors or manufacturers. The third element is you don't even want to try supply chain optimization unless you're transacting EDI with that supplier. The next piece is it's between 2 trading partners. So again, unlike the perfect department index where you focused on a department transactions and the business of that particular department, this is truly 2 trading partners sitting down and working together in that regard. As we talk about the trading partners, the intent of the original team was to develop a tool that worked regardless of where you are in the supply chain. So these tools and concepts work equally well whether you're a manufacturer dealing with a distributor, a manufacturer transacting directly to the hospital, or a hospital transacting with a distributor. These same concepts and principles hold true regardless of where you are in the supply chain. Going to the next page, then, when we talk about how would you get started as far as an initiative goes. So you're an organization, supply chain optimization sounds like an interesting concept. Here's how you would get started. The first piece that you would get involved with is the plan pillar. And I'm going to get more in detail as to what the plan pillar is all about. But what you're really looking at is developing the supply chain internally within your organization and making sure that you've got the right concepts and principles in place in the supply chain, planning it appropriately before you move on to the next level. Then, once you do your planning and you set your supply chain up correctly, then you select that strategic trading partner. You select the company that you want to start this initiative with. You assemble a team, and those team members you see in the box on the right-hand side are some possibilities of who you would pick for that for that team. And again, this is both trading partners would have representatives from the appropriate areas that would serve on this team, because it's an equal shared responsibility between both trading partners. Then you would identify the pillar or pillars in which you want to focus on the reoccurring pillars, the 5 pillars after plan, and then the team would start their work. They would look at the metrics, drill down into the metrics, and look at the best practices, and actually start then the improvement process. And then you would measure the improvement over time by using those same metrics. So when we talk about the area of greatest need, so which one would you focus your attention on? The tool talks about doing a scoring system first of a key metric in each of the 5 reoccurring pillars. From that perspective, then you would determine which pillar has the greatest opportunity. So again, plan is the only non-reoccurring process, and again, you would do the planning probably infrequently, once every 3 to 5 years as you design your supply chain in overall, and then you would then, with your trading partner, focus in on one of the reoccurring pillars: price, purchase, fill, receive, or pay. With each of those pillars, there is one key metric. You would compute the value of that metric. That will give you a score for each of the metrics from 0 to 100. You would then look at those that have the highest scoring, and those are the pillars that are being done most efficiently today, and you would look at the pillar or pillars that have the lowest scores. Those are the areas that you're going to want to focus your resources and attention, because those are the areas of the greatest opportunity, are going to produce the greatest cost savings. And that's where the team starts their work. So moving to the next page, here are the pillars. And here, the first three pillars are shown here. The key metrics are in red, where you would compute the percent of whatever the value is. And again, looking at the lowest scoring pillar, that's the area of greatest focus that you would then drill down on. The other key metrics for that pillar, then, you would then want to compute them once you start to focus on the pillar of where your attention is going to be. And so then that will give you the opportunity and the direction on where you need to go to start your improvement efforts. And then the other two pillars are shown here. So that's the process in which the team would follow in going through it. You would plan, set up your supply chain the way that it needs to be set up, and then do the computation of the key metrics for each of the 5 reoccurring pillars, finding the area of greatest need and focus, and then the team, with representatives from each of the 2 trading partners, would then start their efforts, their diligence, to then start to improve the scoring of that particular metric. So if we go into plan, let me talk a little bit about plan. This is the only one of the 6 that are the non-reoccurring. So similarly, as I talked about the perfect order, where the perfect order started with the purchase order, and that really that left off a major piece of the supply chain, namely the requisitioning department, and that was critical to really put that on the front end of the process. In supply chain optimization, it's a similar kind of a process here. One has to plan first before you select your trading partner and make sure that your supply chain is designed the way that it needs to be designed, so that then you can sit down with the trading partner and actually work through these non-reoccurring processes. So you have to plan correctly. It must happen first, and before you can actually then sit down with the individual trading partner to gain the maximum benefit of supply chain optimization. That's why plan is non-reoccurring. It happens first before you actually start working with the trading partner and improving on the other pillars. The plan process, the team broke this down into 3 major areas. One is the system level, the second is the department level, and the third is the item level. So if we talk about the supply chain optimization based upon strategic decisions and best practice applications, you really want to focus on planning at those 3 levels. The system level is truly at the organizational level. So to bring this home, what that would mean is, from a distribution point of view, a hospital or an IDN will determine, are you going to do a self-distribution model? Are you going to have bulk, JIT, lowest unit of measure? Are you going to have a centralized purchasing department? Are you going to have a centralized receiving dock and distribute out to the various areas within your organization? That's how you plan the supply chain at the system level. That all has to be put into place prior to going even to the next step. You also are going to plan at the department level. So you're going to, for instance, if you have a new department that starts in the hospital, or you expand a department, or you change the supply chain process, for instance, in the OR, if you move from case carts to supply bundling, that's how you would be redesigning and planning the department supply chain. So that needs to be in place also. The third area is what happens if you change product lines, specific types of product categories. So changing product lines will also have an impact on your trading partner, particularly if that's the products in which you're acquiring from that company. So again, are you going to be buying that product direct, or is that going to go through distribution? That's the planning that goes on in advance at both the system, department, and line item product level before you actually go into the other pillars. So if we look at the system level planning, the way that these are designed, there is no right answer. So there's a series of questions with each of those three levels in the planning pillar. You will go through those questions and design your system, your supply chain system for your organization based upon working through these kinds of scenarios. Again, there is no right or wrong answer. Similarly, you will look at the department level planning, and you'll look at how the product is used within the department. How do you obtain the product most efficiently for that particular department? How do you maximize the productivity of the people and the clinicians of that department? That's the planning that goes on at the department level. PDI would be a good roadmap for helping you in regards to planning at the department level. Then you go to the item level, and again, what types of products are you going to be using to support that clinical effort for that department? And the planning piece at the item level, you'll see, takes you through a series of steps and questions that's required for a successful product conversion. Starts with the validation of the assumptions, goes through the data loading piece of it, how you would convert the product, the distribution or the distributor notification that has to go on, in-servicing and training of your clinical staff, and then managing that on a post-conversion basis. So that's the planning pillar. Once you get done with planning and you identify which pillar that has the greatest opportunity, then you're going to go into that piece of it. And so let's say that you did the planning and you did the scoring of the key metric for the 5 reoccurring processes, and you've identified as price as your greatest opportunity. I'm going to turn it over to Stuart to take you through that piece.
Okay, so we will go through the price process on this one. And again, when we look at the content here, we Denver Health, can't take credit for all of this. This was developed by the team. We're presenting on behalf of the team. And in each of the pillars, we actually started with far more metrics than you'll see as we move through. So those metrics were refined over time as each pillar had two partners work on them to kind of put them through a real-life example. So price happens to be at Denver Health and Owens & Minor. We went through this for almost a year now. The format that you'll see as we go through the price pillar is identical for the other 4 pillars. So they all have a consistent look and feel to them. And as I said, we're not going to go through the other pillars. I'm just going to follow Phil's example where price was the area that we needed to look at. So if you want to have a look at detail, I'm not going to go into huge detail on each of these. If you really want to see the detail, obviously the best thing to do is just to download the tool. To reinforce what Phil said, we have 5 pillars here, and you're going to collect the key metric for each one. And then within the lowest scoring of those, then we're going to have a look at the more detailed metrics. And those metrics, we believe, will actually drive you to a process improvement. So the obvious question is, okay, now I've downloaded the tool and I have these 5 processes. Could I collect every metric on every one of the pillars? Well, of course you could. But our belief is that would take a tremendous amount of time and resource on the part of the partners to be able to do that. And at some point, if you have 2 of your pillars that are scoring 98, how much resource would it take to get from 98 to 99? So we believe there's a kind of a law of diminishing returns. So focus on one pillar that has the lowest score. And recognizing that everyone has different ERP systems, query tools, and all that good stuff, the team decided early on that this is not, to Phil's point, a piece of software. Really what we want to focus on here is the process. We want to look at the process, and we want to look at the data sources, how you collect them, and how you develop a strategy with your partners. It's more important to understand what's driving the metric than to deliver a piece of software that gives you a number. And nor do we attempt to define how the partners will build and transmit and receive all this data. So, for instance, if you're taking an 832, we're not really telling you exactly, what should be in the 832 if you send it every Monday or Tuesday. It's more important to understand what the 832 can do for you. It's more important to understand the content and how it's consumed by the partners. So if we start with price in our example, once again, just to reinforce, the look and feel of all the pillars looks the same. They all have a summary, the process and tools, price how to maintain the integrity, controllable and uncontrollable causes, and the metrics themselves. So if we look at the executive summary, it really is talking to what's the focus. So obviously for the price pillar, we're trying to make sure that we keep our pricing intact between trading partners. Then we have a statement of really what's the problem. The problem is that if you don't have correct prices, there's a huge amount of waste that falls into the supply chain in examples such as late charges, reduced productivity, you're missing prompt pay discounts, or ultimately you're actually paying the wrong price for the product. And again, in the executive summary, for each of the 5 pillars, you'll see a box that talks to the metrics, and the key metric is in red. So again, if we were looking at pricing, we've come here because the percent of lines with no price discrepancy is the lowest scoring in the 5 pillars. The process and tools, the first part of this defines what the key metric is. So in this instance, again, we're just looking at pricing. It's looking at the 855 transaction. How far off is the 855 from the 850? So how far off is the acknowledgement from your partner from the order that you sent? So is the price wrong? How wrong is it? How many are wrong? So we're looking at, so there's a definition there that tells us what we need to be looking at. And we have kind of a base methodology here. Here's what we believe is the best way to keep your pricing updated and in sync. And we have the results here at the bottom. This is the theory, and we'll see a real-life example with some real-life answers to how good can pricing be. So these are the processes and the tools. Each of the 5 also has this, how do you maintain the integrity? So we tried to distill to a series of steps what you would need to do to keep the integrity in place. And again, as soon as you put it down to the 12 steps, it looks like it's going to be really easy. But this is not an easy process. This is the result of a lot of validation that you would need to do to get to this point. And you probably couldn't take this one and just drop it in and repeat it by rote at your organization. This is a roadmap. And we understand that you will probably make minor tweaks to this to fit in the situation between you and your partner. What we wanted to do was put something here that avoids everyone in the supply chain having to reinvent the wheel. And again, I'm not going to go through the 12 steps. You can download the tool and have a look through the steps, and if you have questions, we can come back to those later. So that's how we believe you would maintain the integrity. And we have a graphic in each one as well that kind of gives you a timeline of how we believe it should look in the real world. And then what happened, as I said, each of these pillars was tested by 2 trading partners. And we came up with the fact that after a 6-month pilot, it became clear that, again, there are diminishing returns. And some criteria are kind of out of scope of the pilot. So we discovered there are clearly things that are under our control. So if you're synchronizing your data using an 832, you're going to have clean part numbers, clean units of measure, hopefully clean contract prices. But there may be system limitations or internal control limitations that really are out of scope of the project. And for instance, here's in purchasing where we found problems. We found problems with reprocessed items. In our world, we don't give them a unique number. So if we order a reprocessed item and there isn't one available, we get a new item back. Well, they're different items. So from the supplier's perspective, they are shipping us a new item. So although we asked for a reprocessed item, we received a new item. So in the world of the 855, I'm receiving a different item number, a different manufacturer's item number, and potentially a different price, which is important to this pillar. So there are some things that, and in your world, these may be controllable. Maybe you have an automatic substitution between a reprocessed item and a new item. But these are really just the lessons that were learned along the way by these two trading partners. And the other important thing is the two partners need to decide how they're going to measure and report on these uncontrolled discrepancies. If we decide that we want to include these in the metrics, it would be wrong to say that Denver Health and Owens & Minor expect to be running at 99.5% if a volume of my purchases are reprocessed items or substitutions. That would be unfair. So decide if these are in or out of scope. So again, we're really just pointing to the fact that you will probably struggle to get to 100%, but agree between partners up front how you're going to measure these things. And again, we include a graphic on what we believe are controllable and uncontrollable. Again, may change in your world. And on the right, we include a box in each one with what we consider to be best practices. The best practices here are talking about the 832s, validating against the 855s, and having that time constraint that you will fix the 855, and therefore the price next time you order it should be correct. And the next thing we'll look at is the metrics themselves. And before we get to the metrics themselves, again, let's just step back 1 second and say, the metrics you're going to see here were gathered from many sources, both inside and outside healthcare. And we went to a lot of people in healthcare to gather these metrics. Some come from Supply Chain Council and came from the SCORE model. And we wanted to apply a series of tests to each of these metrics. Is the metric something you can actually gather? I mean, how many times have we ended up with metrics that sound so good, but you can't actually collect them? And once you've gathered them, does it actually tell you about your current performance? And does that measure lead to an identifiable action? We really wanted to be very careful in this tool that metrics lead to action. We didn't want to end up with a series of metrics that are kind of gray as to what you should do with them. So and the other thing that you need to do is you need to only include metrics that measure the relationship between these two business partners. These are not internal metrics. These are not metrics that you collect internally and distribute internally. So within a hospital, this is not your cost per adjusted patient day. This does not affect your relationship with a business partner and does not lead to a direct action. Yes, these are very important metrics, but they don't measure the effectiveness of the supply chain relationship. And these are the metrics that we believe will form the basis of your business reviews. So your quarterly business review, these metrics, we believe, is the agenda to that. And what, and personally, I hope is that we get away from these metric hand grenades in business reviews where I say my fill rate's 98% and you say the fill rate's 78%. We need to agree the sources of these metrics before we even get in there. And this webinar is not focused on a review or a critique of 57 metrics that you'll see. We're just trying to set up a framework that you can use as you move towards supply chain optimization. If you want to look at the metrics in detail, feel free to download the tool and have a look. So within the metrics for pricing, we have the fundamental. So what are we trying to get to here? What's the fundamental issue we're trying to look at? Then we have the best practice. What's proven to be the best way to improve this? Then we have the metric itself. How are you going to measure your progress? And a target. So how well do you think you can do? And again, you may find that the target of 98 is unacceptable. It needs to be 100. Or 90 is great in your business. These are just the thoughts of the team as we put this together. And is this an exhaustive list? No. You probably have other metrics. But please remember the rules. These have got to be actionable metrics agreed between two business partners. Could you add and delete, change these? Of course you can. We really don't mind, but we believe this gives you a great basis to start any discussion between two business partners. And then each pillar concludes with a case study. This one happens to be between us, Denver Health, and Owens & Minor, and we go through the process that we actually follow. So yes, there's a theory 6 pages ago of how we believe you would go through a pricing, but this tells you what we actually did. It gives you some results, some of the keys to success, and kind of the things we tripped over on our way there. So there's some things to be aware of and things to watch out for. So once again, stepping back, 5 pillars. Each of the pillars has this same style of content. You would only use the pillar that has the lowest score. Only in that particular pillar would you go and then measure the detail metrics. So we would not expect you to measure every one of these metrics unless you had a problem in pricing. So that's just a walkthrough of one example in price. And at this point, we're going to hand it back to Dennis.
Stuart, thank you. Appreciate that very much. It's as I think folks on our webinar can see, there's a lot here. And a couple of things I want to point out before we get to some questions, and we've got some good questions. The SMI copyright allows users and folks who download and use the supply chain optimization pathway to cut and paste and use pieces or sections of it, so long as SMI is given some attribution in a reference site. So we try to make these tools as easy as possible for people to use. And again, we encourage people to cut, paste, copy, use what it is, whatever you can find in here, so long as you just say that SMI was the source. A couple of things occurred to me, Stuart and Phil, as you were going through the presentation. There are a number of one-off uses, if you will, for the tool that we have here. For instance, every time you're adding a new item to your inventory, you can pull out the part of this plan section that deals with item planning and use that as a roadmap. That's not something that's going to happen every 3 to 5 years, but probably happen, every few weeks within a healthcare organization. So if you're not dedicated to doing a full supply chain optimization project, there's a one-off use just to give some guidance on how to add a new item. The same on the plans piece about strategic planning. When you enter a strategic planning process for supply chain, this planning section, particularly the system-level planning, really prompts you with some great questions to ask and some things to think about. As well as another use that I saw here within the price section that you displayed. There's almost an executive prescription, if you will. If you're a supply chain executive and your operation is experiencing pricing problems, you can read this section and follow some of the areas for management to focus on and some of the questions to ask. So I think there's a lot of multiple uses around this tool, and I think it's going to be one of the best ones that SMI has produced. Got some questions during your presentation, some great questions. First one that came in is do we know of any other industry besides healthcare that uses a similar approach? Phil and Stuart, I can offer my 2 bits on that. I don't think we do know of any other industry that uses a similar approach. Perhaps you do.
I don't think so. I think a lot of people, a lot of other industries use these metrics. I don't think anyone's ever pulled them together in a product like this. Mm-hmm. that said, you measure within the pillars and then focus. To your point, I think none of the metrics earth-shattering, are they? I don't think anyone will ever see a metric here that they thought, oh, I never thought of that one. The kind of metrics that have been out there, I think what the team have tried to do is package them in a unique way, and a way that makes it a lot of sense and very easy to pick up for any two trading partners.
No, that's a good comment. We have a lot of activity in this industry, and I think through the pilot processes that were done for each pillar, we were able to pull it all together pretty well. Here's a question that came in. Can one pillar be optimized while others are not even addressed?
This is Phil. Absolutely. And actually what we did, again, when we started this pilot in the pricing piece of it, we sat down with Owens & Minor and did the calculations as a distributor of ours, and found that price was really the lowest score. That's where we focused our resources and attention. And as that score then jumped a number of points, and we started to get a handle on exactly what was going on and eliminating the price discrepancies, then the next lowest scoring pillar was the fill pillar. And we looked at that as far as back order rates and whatever. And so quickly we moved the resources, changed the makeup of the team slightly, and moved into the fill area while we continued to measure our progress continued to be made on the pricing side of it. And then we focused our attention on fill, and we started to see that number start to creep up also. And at this point in time, after a year and a half, we're somewhat in maintenance mode with Owens & Minor. Why? Because all of our scores are running at the target level, and we use the tool now to see any kind of problems that crop up and quickly be able to address those problems and get it back in line. So it's not, again, a one-time flash in the pan. This is a continuing effort that really dominates our business practice with in this case, Owens & Minor, our distributor, and is the subject of our discussion on a monthly and quarterly basis as we do our business reviews, as Stuart said. So again, it's not, once you're there and you reach the targeted goal, you continue to use the tool to make sure that things don't regress and go back to where they were, and to be able to sustain those gains.
And I think the other interesting thing is the interdependency between the pillars. So we started on price, but as you go through and correct pricing, lo and behold, your pay score goes up. Not surprising, really, is it? But right. What happens in one pillar definitely has an influence in another. So you look at fill, and you increase your fill, and your receive score goes up. So there's a lot of interdependence between the pillars as well. So yes, even by focusing on one pillar, you're going to have an improvement elsewhere as well.
Oh, that's a good point. Another question that came in, it said you showed on a slide that a price discrepancy can cost each organization 15 minutes to resolve. Was that a number derived from the pilot?
It wasn't derived from the pilot. It actually came from some industrial engineering work done by Owens & Minor at their corporate office. And that was a number that actually was generated by the executives of Owens & Minor on some studies and analysis that they had done. And again, it's an average. I mean, obviously, a number of price discrepancies can be resolved much quicker than that. Others are much more complicated and take a longer period of time. But I think using the 15-minute increment is probably a good number to be able to then compute what potential cost savings, even though they're soft cost savings from an efficiency point of view of the result of eliminating these errors.
And I think it's a very good point. The pillars and the stuff we presented today is a reflection of the two trading partners. You should not take this as gospel. So just because Denver Health and Owens said 15 minutes, you should not take this to your executive board and say, I'm going to save you $3 million next year.
You may want to validate the number.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fair statement, Stuart and Phil. Thank you. Here's
But the
another
overall,
question.
but the overall impact of that too, as we all know, is that error rates don't translate well at board meetings. And so again, what executive staff is looking for is, okay, that's fine. We understand that you've eliminated errors and that you're much more efficient than you were. But what does that mean to us from a financial perspective? So this will give at least a guideline, something that people can then translate error rates into actual dollar impact.
Good point. Thank you, Phil. We're doing right on with time here. We've got a couple of minutes left. I got one last question that came in. It says, how much time and resources would you anticipate might be needed by an organization to implement across that organization's supply chain? You know, but before you answer that question, I know that we've talked about you can do one pillar or you can do them all. So let's try to answer that question as best as we can. Say for one pillar first. And I know the answer can be it depends, but how much time and resources do you think would an organization need to dedicate to do one of the pillars?
I will tell you this, and I'll use, because it was the example we walked through with the Owens & Minor and pricing piece of it. When we set up our team, we literally met initially on a weekly basis. It was every Friday morning for about an hour to an hour and a half. And that was probably a room of, or a team size of about 10 people. In addition to the weekly meeting that we had, there was a key person from our side and also from Owens & Minor side that were meeting initially almost daily for an hour or so as they worked through the various issues. Now, that was fairly intensive from the beginning, but once the process, the 12-step process, was put into place and the numbers started to improve, the number of discrepancies went down, obviously the investment in time decreased accordingly. But initially it was a huge investment. Now we meet with Owens & Minor on a quarterly basis to just review where the numbers are, and it's an hour meeting as we go through all of the pillars and where we're at, and then what discrepancies have occurred. So again, the team of 6 to 10 people then meet on a quarterly basis at this point in time, now a year into it. We moved probably 6 months into the project is when we backed off and went to every other week, and then probably 3 months after that, we moved to a monthly basis as far as the meeting goes. But again, the two individuals were still meeting on a regular basis, maybe not daily, but at least weekly, to talk about contracting and all of the various aspects of the 12 steps.
Great. So you know, in the beginning, it's kind of front-loaded. There's a deeper
there's a discovery that has to happen. Yeah, there's a discovery process that takes time. Yeah, you've got to get down to that root cause.
Mm-hmm. I'll ask you this one last question, and then we'll adjourn. You think that this supply chain optimization process, what does it do for the relationship between the two trading partners from your perspective?
I mean, we've talked about partnerships in this industry for 50 years. This has truly developed the partnership in regards to that supplier that you go through this process with. You can't help but to have that close tie-in. Why? Because there's transparency both in operations from their perspective and the hospital's perspective. And there's a trust that is created as a result of that. If we talk about business processes and we talk about partnerships and we talk about truly having you know, an integration between the supplier and the provider organization, this is a tremendous tool that will take you where you need to go. It truly has done it as far as our relationship. And we've now expanded that to 5 different suppliers here, and after the first of the year, we'll add another 5 suppliers. So by this time, by first quarter of 2015, we will have 10 suppliers that we'll have up on supply chain optimization.
And
Wow.
I think the great thing is it's based on science. We agree what the metrics are, so there's none of this discussion and distraction. I mean, we both sides know we're looking at the 855 every day.
Right.
You can't hide something from us. We're both looking at the same data now.
Well, great. Well, Stuart and Phil, thank you so much for not only today's session, but all the energy and effort that you put into leading the team that created this. We reached our 1 hour period, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to encourage those SMI members on the line to go to the Your SMI section and in the website and download Supply Chain Optimization. If you need assistance in getting to that section, certainly feel free to reach out to Terry Gallagher or Christine Dean or any of the SMI staff about the passwords and so forth. We're going to send a survey out to everyone following the session today, so we encourage folks to respond to that survey. And again, Phil and Stuart, thank you so much for your time. This session was recorded, and we are holding the option to put it out on the SMI website as an on-demand webinar. So we will notify members of our community when that's taken place. So we want to wish everybody a happy and healthy holiday season, and happy supply chain to everyone. Thank you all very much for today, and Phil and Stuart, thank you again. We'll adjourn.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye now.